So you think the city will find ways of making income to pay for this shortfall?
Absolutely. And I'll give you another prime example of it. You live in a house for 20 years. Maybe you bought it for $1 million 20 years ago. You sell it to me. I pay $3 million for it. You were paying, by the way, the New York Yankees stay when they were playing in Oakland in foreclosure. That's unfathomable 20 years ago.
Do you think this city is fixable? Is it possible to turn things around? Because it's a rich city, it has a lot of international, it has a big brand.
We've had no less than 6 public figures be convicted in federal court for white-collar crime, corruption under the present mayor's reign. And you see these convictions and you say to yourself, how much more is there out there?
My guest today is Peter Fatou. He's the president at San Francisco's Tax Appeal. Today he's going to discuss how he saw and dealt with corruption firsthand in the city of San Francisco and why he believes corruption is a major factor in today's San Francisco's downfall.
What goes on in the assessor's office is criminal. Since 1992, San Francisco has not had an assessor who has a professional background in real estate.
I'm Siamai Korami. Welcome to California Insider. Pete, it's
Yes.
great to have you on. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Simo. It's a pleasure to be down here.
So we want to talk to you about your city, San Francisco. You're from San Francisco. You're here to tell us what's happening. And there's going to be a big impact on San Francisco by what's happening today. But can you tell us what's going on in San Francisco right now?
Well, as a native San Franciscan and someone who's lived there all his life, I can tell you that in the last 25 years, it's been a steady decline. And it's at its apex, I believe, now. The homeless problem is a multifaceted problem. It's everywhere in the city. You'll see tent encampments everywhere. Being homeless is one thing, and it's a shame people are homeless. But what has taken over the homeless encampments is the drug addiction. Whether it's methamphetamines, cocaine, heroin, open on the streets, they're shooting up. The people have to either walk around them or avoid those streets. I can tell you there's 3 federal buildings in San Francisco. There's the old federal building on McAllister Street within earshot or eyeshot of City Hall. There's the large federal building that was built in the 60s on Golden Gate Avenue. And there's the new federal building on Mission Street at 7th Street. It's about 10 years old. Within the shadow of each of those buildings, you can find tent encampments, drug exchanges, sales, use within the shadow of those buildings. The FBI sits up on a floor at the federal building on Golden Gate Avenue in their offices. They're 100 feet from the actual sales of the drugs that are going on Larkin Street, which is a street that boundaries that federal building. You look at the state building on McAllister Street. You look at the other state building at McAllister and Van Ness. Tent encampments. And City Hall is right in the middle of all of that. It's not even restricted to those locations. It's in the neighborhoods. And that's where people, they've seen this and it's almost like your hands are up in the air. And here's a city that spends the city budget for 23-24 fiscal year in the budget is $648 million for homelessness programs. 648. San Francisco General Hospital, which is on a separate budget funded through the University of California because they administer it, but it comes from city funds. There's another $300 million in that budget to accommodate the homeless problem. That's almost $1 billion of taxpayer money. And there's no end in sight, and there's no cures. We've been here for 30 years watching this as it gets progressively worse, and the money is spent And we all look around and we say, where's the results? It's worse today than it was 30 years ago. And you keep spending and spending and spending, and we have no results. The city of San Francisco, the property taxes bring in $2.5 billion into the general fund.
From
2.5
property
billion
taxes.
from property taxes. You've got a third of that, more than a third of that, being spent on homeless. $1 billion on the homeless problems, and you have $2.5 billion coming in property taxes. That's a third of the, that's over a third being spent from the property taxes to that, and you have no results. That's what's bothering the people who have a stake in staying in San Francisco. Where are the results?
And is this tax money gonna shrink because all these people are moving out, retailers are moving out, hotels?
I can tell you that there are several large buildings in San Francisco, hotels, the Park 55 for one, where, by the way, the New York Yankees would stay when they were playing in Oakland. I know that firsthand. You have several others. They're in foreclosure. The owners have given the lender back the paper. They can't afford to pay the monthly mortgage. You have the old historic Hibernia Bank at the corner of Jones and Turk, I believe it is. But anyway, the developer turned back the paper. They can't afford it. That's what's happening. The real estate market has gone upside down. Condominiums, their values have just dropped like a rock in the last 3 years since the pandemic. And that property tax revenue isn't there like it was before. That $2.5 billion in property taxes that the city's counting on, that doesn't account for how many people are going to say, hey, wait a minute, my property taxes are too high. You are valuing my property too high. They're appealing, and I represent people who appeal their property taxes. And when you have major buildings in San Francisco, the Embarcadero Center buildings, 4 or 5 of those huge buildings, the Bank of America building on California Street, the Transamerica building, the Salesforce building, when they're at 30% vacancy, they're saying to the city, hey, wait a minute, our buildings aren't worth what you're taxing us on. Their value's not there anymore. We have lost these employees. They're either working at home or we're just not filling up these buildings. So that $600 million building that the city was assessing at $600 million, bringing in close to $6 million in property taxes, they're saying to the city, hey, wait a minute, we're not worth $600 million anymore. We don't have the people that are occupying these properties like we used to. You have to give us a tax break. And they're appealing and they're winning. And that's going to shrink that $2.5 billion that the city thinks is on the books for revenue from property taxes.
And what will happen what's going to happen when it shrinks? Do they cut back from the homeless spending? Do they cut back from the police? What will?
Well, let's take the police first. And you've had several people on your show that have expressed this from up north. Today, as we sit here, San Francisco's police force is authorized to have 1,900 sworn officers. As we sit here today, they have 1,400. They are 500 short. They can't even get, and I know this firsthand, my wife is retired from the San Francisco Police Department. When they get a class in the academy for new recruits, say 30 or 40, if they're lucky to get them, by the time it comes to graduating from the academy, they're getting 4 and 5. That's it from that class. They weed them out. You don't have enough people to fill the spots. And people don't want to come into policing for the national reasons we all have seen. It's defund the police, don't respect the police. And that's taking a toll. So when you don't have those revenues coming in, that $2.5 billion of property tax revenue, where are you going to fill the gaps? Where are you going to get the money from? It takes today to pay a parking officer, a meter maid, as we used to call them, It's $172.88 they make per day for salary in this right now. When they write their second ticket, they've paid their salary and everything's profit to the city. The city would rather hire 100 more parking attendants, parking officers, than policemen, because the parking officers bring in revenue. And I guarantee you, a parking officer doing their job on an 8-hour shift is going to bring in over 20 tickets. Do the math. $150, $180 a ticket, that doesn't even count the towaways. When you get your car towed, it's close to $1,000 by the time you get it out. So all this revenue, the city says, hey, we need more revenue, so they go stick it to the people who park their cars and, maybe errant from feeding a meter. There's $150 there. They're finding places to make this revenue. You sell your $2 million house in San Francisco, you as a seller have to pay $20,000 to the city as a transfer tax. For what? You're leaving. Why are you being told you got to pay $20,000? And I guarantee you the Board of Supervisors will look at that cash cow and they'll jack up the percentage of what you have to pay on that sale price. Today it's 20 grand on a $2 million house. Fresh money into the city coffers. And you're leaving town and you're saying to yourself, what am I paying a transfer tax for? It's ridiculous.
This episode is sponsored by Midas Gold Group. Saudi Arabia has said they are open to accepting currencies for oil other than the dollar. Kissinger set up a petro-business agreement with the Saudis in the 1970s, enshrining the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. This could be shattered. The grave consequences would be felt by every American. The Fed and politicians have abused the management of our monetary and fiscal policy. They have thrown an anchor on Americans with over $200 trillion in debt. That includes owed entitlements. We also have the BRICS countries forming an alliance to control commodities we need. Would they give them up for devalued dollars? Will they back their currencies with commodities while we back with nothing? Is this the de-dollarization by many countries? It's up to. So you think the city will find ways of making income to pay for this shortfall?
Absolutely. And I'll give you another prime example of it. You live in the house for 20 years. Maybe you bought it for $1 million 20 years ago. You sell it to me. I pay $3 million for it. You were paying approximately $13,000 a year in property taxes. When I buy it for $3 million, the city's going to get $35,000 a year in property taxes because they're going to reassess my purchase to $3 million and they're going to wave goodbye to you and they're happy to see you go because you were only paying half that, if that. So they know where the revenue streams can come from and they'll jack up the transfer tax, more revenue, they'll jack up the property taxes as best they can, and that's what's going on.
Now, do you think the city leaders, I saw that the mayor wanted to bring the UC system, UC schools to downtown. Do you think the city leaders are not concerned about what's going on?
They're concerned, but they're grabbing at straws to solve it. If I was a businessman and I had a company and I rented, say, the Bank of America building on California Street, I paid a pretty good premium price per square foot for my rent. You bring in UC, you're trying to put a thumb in the dike. The dam is bursting and we'll put a UC school down here. Well, they're not going to pay what the average businessman was paying or company was paying downtown for office space. They're going to pay a pittance of a percentage of what they were paying. So what's it going to solve?
And the students are not going to spend much because they're students, right? Compared to business people, if they were to go shopping in that area, right?
Well, that's exactly correct. And you brought up an interesting point. When those buildings were 70, 80% full, or 80 or 90% full in the heyday, Those employees were there. They weren't home on a Zoom. Those employees would go downstairs for lunch and support the guy that had the cafe or the shoe shop in the neighborhood or whatever. Those people aren't there. Those mom and pop shops are going broke. There are more for lease signs on frontage properties where retail was had existed. They couldn't survive. There's nobody down there anymore. There's nobody spending money in their shops. And that's been the price we've paid for this remote, drives me crazy, remote working. They have to bring people back to work downtown. Mark Benioff, the founder and owner of Salesforce, built the highest tower in the whole city. A week ago, he says in the press, city's going in the wrong direction. Here's a guy that's been a big benefactor to the mayor and a lot of programs in the city. He knows, and he's against remote employees. Bring them back. There's no reason not to bring them back. People are getting too cushy about, oh, I'll work from home. Socially, it doesn't work. Economically, it doesn't work. And it's costing the city.
Pete, you mentioned that they got to bring the people back, but some people are saying that the crime and homelessness is another side of this, that's actually people don't want to go because what they see in the streets. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a convenient excuse. If you're going to a downtown high-rise to work, you're going to be insulated from the homeless. Once you're in your building, you're in your building. They're not in the lobbies downstairs where you go to lunch and all that. They're out on the street. So I don't buy that argument. I think socially we're paying a heavy price for people not working side by side in offices, and I just don't think it works. Crime's always been in cities. It's just that the homelessness has just gotten so out of hand, but it's basically out on the streets, not in the buildings, of course.
So you were saying that the city has kind of changed over the last 3 decades. It's gotten a lot worse. Some people say you guys, San Franciscans, you guys wanted this, you voted for it. Did you guys really vote for this? Because mostly it's...
I understand what you're saying. Unfortunately, there are coalitions that band together, and when these coalitions get together, they're following votes the way they want them to vote. They overwhelm the moderate to conservative person in San Francisco. The so-called east side of the city controls the vote. The west side used to be a factor, not so much anymore, and that's the bedroom communities of the Sunset, the Richmond, and those areas. The concentration of voters is really, the majority is on the east side. You also have the homeowner and the renter. The renters far outweigh the homeowners on the voting rolls. So when you have something that's going to benefit the homeowner, generally speaking, the renters are going to not go along with it, and it's almost a lost cause at that point. Until the coalitions wake up and see that what they're voting for is destroying the city, it's going to be the status quo, unfortunately. You know, just last week, another conviction in federal court for public corruption in San Francisco. We've had no less than 6 public figures be convicted in federal court for white-collar crime, corruption, under the present mayor's reign. There wasn't a district attorney. Now, Chesa Bodine was the district attorney who we removed because of his ultra-liberal leanings. But he was on duty when these people were committing their crimes. The state attorney general, he was nowhere to be found. The city attorney of San Francisco was nowhere to be found. It took the federal government to come in and expose this corruption. And you have to wonder, how come these other three
More local authorities
Exactly.
are not coming in.
judicial local authorities, not a peep out of them about the corruption? And here we have 6 people have gone to jail, convicted in federal court of their crimes of corruption. This isn't tenable, and it speaks to the stranglehold, and I'm a lifelong Democrat, but it speaks to the stranglehold of the Democrats in San Francisco, and it's going to be that way. There's no way the Republicans are going to get anybody elected in San Francisco, but for the people not to criticize those 3 arms of government that had nothing to do with those convictions and took a blind eye to them, that makes you wonder.
Now, do you think this kind of corruption is deep in San Francisco right now, based on what you have seen?
I know from my experience that the corruption exists in the assessor's office in San Francisco. I represent many taxpayers before the Assessment Appeals Board. It's an independent board that hears the referee, that hears the assessor's opinion of a property's value and the taxpayer's opinion, and they render a decision. The board's not corrupt. What goes on in the assessor's office is criminal. Since 1992, San Francisco has not had an assessor who has a professional background in real estate.
Do you think this is across the board? Do you think one of the reasons San Francisco is in a place it is as a city is because of this? Like, people have gotten into jobs that they should not be getting, just they're getting it because of political connections?
Well, that is a factor, and it's certainly a factor in the assessor's office. And, you know, the assessor of every county in this state has the constitutional duty to fairly assess. In San Francisco, it's, hey, the Board of Supervisors needs the money, the mayor needs the money, let's keep the values up artificially. And, you know, here we are having to go down and fight for every penny that's for a fair assessment, an equitable assessment. The city had an assessor who was on the Board of Supervisors prior to being the assessor. She purchased a house with her husband in one of the bedroom communities out in the Sunset District in 2006.
So the Board of Supervisors, somebody on the Board of Supervisors became an assessor.
She eventually became the assessor.
Okay.
But before she became assessor, she bought her house in 2006. In the typical way you go about filing for an appeal of your property taxes, you go to City Hall or you go online, you fill out an application, and you file it with the Assessment Appeals Board. And you're saying, hey, I don't think my taxes are being assessed fairly, and I'd like to have a hearing. This person never filed anything of an appeal.
And you were on the appeal board, right?
I was on the appeals board in 2006, but I left shortly thereafter. I wasn't there when this happened.
Okay.
And it was all done under the table. An assessor arbitrarily reduced that Board of Supervisors' house in property taxes for 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. Wow. 4 straight years, he reduced that person's property taxes, no record of an appeal. Then, before Mayor Lee passed away, Phil Teen got elected to the state senate, and the mayor appointed this person from the Board of Supervisors as the new assessor. She reduced her own property taxes the next year without an appeal. She did it arbitrarily.
Wow.
You talk about the chicken, the wolf or fox in charge of the chicken coop. This is the stuff that goes on, and it's got to be called out.
And do you think it's across the board in the city? Because it's a rich city, it has a lot of international, it has a big brand, and it has all these tech companies there, and all of a sudden we're seeing it in this situation.
Unfortunately, it comes down to that 5-letter word, greed. These people that just got convicted in federal court that we talked about for corruption, all wealthy, relatively wealthy people. Why did they need this? Why did they need more? It's greed. And that's what happened with that assessor. It's greed. And you see these convictions and you see these instances that I just pointed out, and you say to yourself, how much more is there out there? And the voters, the populace, they have to be saying to themselves, how much of this do we have to tolerate? You got London Breed, who's going to basically be unopposed. And, 20 years ago, corruption like this, he would have been bounced as the mayor by now. And the people have had, it's a very difficult atmosphere where people just have thrown up their arms and said, there's nothing we can do. We're getting the short end of the stick and nobody's standing up for us.
Now, what do you think is going to happen to San Francisco if this continues at the rate it's going?
The homelessness problem is front and center. They're not taking, it's a Band-Aid approach. It's an expensive Band-Aid at $1 billion a year, but there's no results. The streets are still bad. The drug dealing is still bad. We don't see the light at the end of the tunnel is the train coming the other way. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. I'm an optimist by nature, but you look at the last 10, 15 years, how can you be optimistic?
Why are so many people leaving California? It wasn't long ago, people from everywhere wanted to move to the Golden State to enjoy a better life. Sadly, the standard of living has been dropping in the past decade. Are you like me and wonder why this is happening? I'm Siamak Khorrami, host of California Insider. In our film, Leaving California, The Untold Story, I take you on an intimate journey of love, loss, tragedy, and hope as residents face the prospect of leaving their beloved state. Everyday people like you tell their stories about why they have to move out of the state even though they don't want to. Experts and policymakers also give insights about what's happening behind the scenes. Together, we get to the root cause of this exodus. Go to leavingcalifornia.com to view the first 15 minutes of the film for free. By watching Leaving California, you can be part of the solution. Again, go to leavingcalifornia.com.